Welcome back to How to Tickle Yourself. I am your host, Duff McDonald, along with my co-host, Joey of Rockledge.
Hello.
We have a repeat guest for you this week, one of our favorite people in the whole wide world. Her name is Linda Lalita Winnick, and she is the founder of Woodstock's Shakti Yoga. Go to enough yoga studios and you'll find that the quality of teaching can be all over the place. Not so at Shakti. Linda's understanding of both hatha yoga, the various yoga poses and flows, as well as the deeper philosophical aspects of yoga, runs so deep that her teaching is not rote. It is spontaneous in the best sense of the word. She does not teach from memory. She teaches from the heart. We all hear a lot of talk about presence and how to find it. It is always in ample supply during one of her classes at Shakti. Of course, much of yoga, as taught in the U.S., is more like an exercise class than an exploration of anything deeper. This is not the case with Linda, a certified yoga teacher with an M.A. in Ayurvedic medicine and a yoga philosophy. Her teaching of yoga integrates over 3 decades of experience as a yoga practitioner and teacher with the principles of exercise, physiology, and the energetics of Ayurveda, the science of life and longevity. True to the spirit of yoga, Linda continues to study with a number of teachers, including Dr. Robert Svoboda for Ayurveda and Tantra, Dr. Parla Jayagopal for Ayurveda, and Shubraji for Vedanta. Not long ago, she invited me and Marguerite to an afternoon talk by Shubraji on the lessons of the Bhagavad Gita. So Shakti is just a place to fine-tune your body. It is a place to fine-tune your soul. But I can't forget the most important part. We, meaning Joey and I, just love being around Linda. The best among us know how to uplift the people that come into their orbit. Practitioners of the high art of being human. Linda Winnick is one of those people. So we figured it was a fine time to share some of her energy again with you, our listeners. Welcome back to the show, Linda. We are glad to see you.
Thank you. And that introduction just has basically turned me into a wet noodle.
I almost started crying at the end. I don't know what happened.
I'm like, I don't even think I can hold my own body up after that.
And
you got me early on.
If you're watching on YouTube, you can see this. If you're listening, Joey and I both have our Shakti yoga shirts on. So we brought our uniforms.
Hey!
At the present moment, traveling town to town, the mystery of the motion, right here, right now, right here, right now, whoa, right here, right now.
All right, Joey, take it. This is your
right.
first time interviewing Linda. Take it away.
It is. The last time you were on the show, you guys touched very lightly on Ayurveda. So I wanted to dive into that a little bit more. So I guess we should start at the beginning and start with what is Ayurveda?
Okay, so Ayurveda, 2 words, Ayur and Veda. Ayur kind of translates into life and health, or life and health. And Veda means science or the study of. So when you're working with Ayurveda, most people only think about it as food, right? And the thing about it, it's the whole mechanism of life and how you heal all the mechanisms of being alive. So a big part of Ayurveda is not just food, it's herbs, and it's mental, using psychology.
Oh, wow. My understanding of it was pretty much like what you said. It was food.
It's food.
But knew that it takes a more holistic approach. So it's not necessarily just food. It's also, like you said, all of the other things. So if someone is interested in it, where do you start?
That is a good question. So where most people start, they do one of those little surveys, and they ask you these questions like, are you ruddy? Are you kind of chubby? Do you have a large sex drive? Are you thirsty? And then you have these little, at the top of each column, you'd have something that's like V, P, or K, which is Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And so those are the doshas, constitutional types. So those things are like how people tend to start. And it's just very confusing because, like, again, it's kind of like most people don't know how to identify themselves. And usually what people find is that that's what their imbalances are. So in Ayurveda, we work with like your constitutional type. In Sanskrit, it's called prakruti. And usually when we're out of balance, which is almost everybody, is called a vikruti, or the deviation from your norm or your constitutional type. So that's why it's hard. So you're dealing with your imbalance when you're doing it. So it's kind of complicated in that. So usually in Ayurveda, you do pulse diagnosis.
And you need a specialist or practitioner. Someone does that for you.
Yeah, usually you do that for you. Someone does that for you who knows how to do it. So, and
just from your pulse,
mm-hmm.
from your pulse, they can tell what?
What
everything?
Where you're deep? Yeah, everything actually. Actually, one of my Dr. Vasant Lad was somebody who I first studied pulse diagnosis with. He can actually read your astrology in your pulse. Whoa. So like he's a master, like beyond master. So he can read all sorts of things. He can read chakras but he, everybody has their own method of doing pulse. So he does one where he does like an organ reading. And so it's different layers of pulse. So he feels it. And then you have the superficial, which is what's called vikruti, that imbalance. And then your deep pulse, which is called your constitutional type. So that's usually the best way to figure out what's going on with that person. It's kind of like Chinese medicine. They do pulse also.
Mm-hmm. And then where do you go from there? You're prescribed a diet, or you're like, what is engaging with Ayurveda mean as a, not as a doctor, but as like one of us?
Like one of you guys? So when you're with it, like, again, my teacher was here, Dr. Jayagopal. So it's always great because he's just a master also. So he was the second person I studied. And actually by being with him so concentrated, I learned a little bit more about how to do pulse. Pulse is like, I can't say it's intuitive where it's like you're kind of looking into some sort of mystical place, but usually Ayurvedic doctors are very intuitive. And so you're reading like a language with your fingers that wouldn't make sense, right? Except if you have a lot of experience with it and you know what each rhythm feels like. So when you're with it, he's sort of like feeling the sum of what he's feeling. And then there's usually some questions asked. It's not like, oh, I'm a mind reader, I'm going to tell you your future. It's like, so are you, how is your sleep? Are you going through this or that? So what happens after that is he makes up a program. So it could be with usually herbs. So he's also a master herbalist, I guess would be the only way to describe him. But he's got like advanced degrees in herbology. And so he also has his own herbal company. And so that's because he wants to make sure that he's regulating the purity of the herbs that he works with. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times you're using herbs, and then sometimes he'll do diet, but it's not like the biggest part of what he does, unless you're doing something like really bad for you, like if you're eating like a certain diet. But it's he'll try to create a program where you're taking your herbs morning and night. Sometimes it's diet. Sometimes you have to drink this, usually like a very undelicious kind of a drink that has like, all sorts of ingredients in it. So to help nourish you. And also a lot of times it's to reduce the inflammation. So again, this is just watching with him. And there's other doctors, and he does it too at his place in California, do what's called panchakarma, which is that you go in for like a extended period of time. And what they do is they prepare your body. So you like have to go on a specific nutrition plan, diet. And then you get like massage, you get like body work treatments to help loosen up your body. And then the panchakarma is like these 5 actions that you can get. That would be, again, the most extreme would be called bloodletting, which is rakta moksha in Sanskrit. Trying to get back into my Ayurvedic Sanskrit words. So that the old school would be using leeches. And that's if you have high pitta. Another way to reduce like high fire in your body, I can explain what those pitta, vata, kapha mean. But so like another one would be virachana, which is you do purgative. So you take stuff and you just, excuse my French, shit your brains out of all that heat from your body. Mm-hmm. And then another one would be do a basti, which is you do enemas. And then there's another one that's called vamana, which is called vomit therapy. So if you have a lot of kapha,
wow,
they prepare you so you vomit. And then there's another one with your nose. So you do nasal treatment. So it just depends on what the problem is. And so you do it, but it's not like casual. It's not like you're going to go and it's a preparation, and then you have to have a post panchakarma treatment. So those are more involved. That's what I'm saying. Ayurveda is much more involved than just your diet. It's but diet's good. It's something to kind of figure out to a certain.
Does hatha yoga factor into that as well? Like just the physical practice?
Mhm.
Is that part of the, I don't know, the treatment? Would it be for everyone, or like, is it just, it's really case by case?
So for hatha yoga originally, like if you read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, usually like the baseline treatments are called kriyas, or cleansing techniques. And so it's also on the same concept. You have to remove what you have too much of that's not helping you. And so you would do certain treatments based on that. Like in the hatha yoga, you have, nali, which is like stomach churning. You also have the vomit therapy, vamana. You do like nasal things. You do eye gazing. So it's the same thing. First, like they believed that, and that's what Ayurveda is. You have to balance your doshas. You have to balance, and again, I'll explain what that is. Otherwise, having a spiritual progress is going to be really difficult, because chances are like, and I'll explain what that means. So are you ready for the Ayurvedic
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Usually I have a chart. I wish I brought my chart with me. This is one of my most overworked charts, that when I train people in Ayurveda, everyone gets this chart. So sorry, I don't have it with me. So anyway, so you have, it's like a continuum of energy. We'll use that word energy. And it has to do with the fact of something that is vibrating really fast on one end of that spectrum, and the other end is vibrating very slow to almost not even moving, right? So it's like dense and subtle. Subtle, vibrating, dense, stop sign, nothing moving. Okay. So on this end of the spectrum, vibrating, you have ether, also known as space, and you have air. Okay. And they have Sanskrit words, but we're using English words. That is called vata. Okay. So vata is like by its nature like that. So if someone says you're behaving vatically, that means you're probably acting like chaotically. You're like, you're kind of like lightheaded, you're goofy, you're indecisive. People that's in the mind when you have a lot of vata in your mind, very creative, but just non-reliable. Like you're like idea, no execution. Okay. So yeah, they could be creatives and artistic. In their bodies, it shows up as kind of thin and kind of wiry. They can't put weight on. They tend to be kind of skinny and dry and kind of gaunt. So they don't have any substance. They lose the substance. And this is extreme. Like we're talking extreme vata. And their digestive tract, they either, like, again, have erratic hunger, appetite, or they're hungry or they're not hungry. They go for like, really strong bursts of energy, and then they're depleted. And then like the way that goes through their body is that like they tend towards constipation, because their bodies are so dry and depleted that they tend towards constipation and poop very little, like little, rabbit turds, maybe. Right? I don't know. Chicken. You have more of a chicken. Okay. And again, it's like when we're talking about Ayurveda, we're never like talking like in a negative. It's just like matter of fact. So when I'm telling someone about it, it's not like this is desirable, undesirable. Certain aspects will be like, yeah, you're thin. Constipation, not so desirable. You know what I mean? But it's like, these are just words. When someone's balanced, they don't have a problem. But usually what happens is people get very addicted to their type. So movement is the major feature behind vata. So vatas are like, again, pecking around, dispersing. And so because of that, they tend to actually activate it. They get it's almost like an intoxicant when they're doing it. So the way that you would do is you have to stabilize them. You have to give them a routine, even though they're like, routine, that's not so fun. I don't want to be Mr. Routine or Mr. Routine, right? You have to like give them like a lot of stabilization. You have to like give them a lot of oil treatments and kind of weigh them down a little bit. So that's the vatas in the room. The pittas, which I think maybe all three of us have a little bit of pitta going on.
Yeah.
But pitta, a little fire. Yep. So the pittas are the fire, oil, water people. So pittas, again, the main energy behind pitta, we'll say, besides it being fire, is transformation. So pittas tend to be like medium build, athletic. We tend to be a little bit more oily, a little bit red. And again, it might just be the coloring on the screen. But, a little bit red in the cheeks. Pittas tend to be, again, and it might be because we like to pittas like to have a little arrogance. So we're like, we tend to be more intelligent. We tend to be the leaders in the room only because we do everything better. Right. So like when we're in our worst state, we're just like, you just have no tolerance for anybody else because they're just not like up to par. They're not smart enough. They don't get it. And so through the heat factor. So, the fire is transformation. You can't put something in fire and not have it transform into something else. Right. So it could be knowledge transformed into a podcast. It could be a book. It could be, you take it and you make it into a business. And so people like who are Pitta tend to take information and you make it into something. Right. And so that's why we tend to have businesses and CEOs and leaders. Pittas, again, tend to have more heat. So either they have really excellent digestion, so we can consume everything, or it's hot. So it's just a fire festival. So it could be like heat and diarrhea. It can turn into acidity. So it could be like acid reflux. It turns into ulcers in the GI tract when there's too much of it. And then, so that's like based on their elimination. And again, like I said, tends towards leadership, but when it's out of control, it turns into arrogance and not so pleasant to be around. I'm going to do like a workshop on how to manage people doshically, how to manage the pitta.
It's a great idea.
And it's like you have to really manage them because it's like two pittas going at it. It's like two rams, butting heads. No one's ever going to win. And then, so at the other end of the spectrum, and so one more thing. So with pittas again, because pittas are ragers, like they're just like, go for it, competitive. And that's just how they feel they should be. Right. And you almost have to meet a pitta with that. So when I teach yoga, I actually I work with a lot of pittas. And so you have to like engage their energy, but then you have to do like a little bait and switch and cool them down and calm them down. So you do have to kind of work them out a little bit. And then all of a sudden the pitta is like relieved and then you can kind of soothe them. So soothing, calming, doing that to a pitta is really helpful for managing them.
And so then, like a pitta being drawn to like really spicy food because we love spicy food. Is that sort of the thing you're saying where you could become kind of addicted to your dosha?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So again, if I was to also do like drug alcohol analysis, pittas tend to be alcoholics. Okay. At some point in their career of pittedness. Yeah. So it's like the attraction of, so like the thing about it is because we already have fire and water and you drink something called fire water, it's like, it's an explosion of like too much of that thing. So like, that's when you can see too, because they just can't handle it. It's just overloaded. It's already too much of that. Right. So I'd say like maybe vatas if they're on crystal meth. Or cocaine, it's like fast and furious and going down, intensely. And so that's, again, if I was to do the drug analysis of that. And the last is the kaphas. So the kaphas are the water and earth. And again, these are just names that are translated from Sanskrit. And they're based on stability, right? So these are the ones with the slow, dense, nothing really moving. So it shows up in their body. They tend to be thicker and they tend to have like thicker skin. They don't wrinkle so much like the vatas are wrinkling. The pittas are wrinkling and losing their hair. And the kaphas are like smooth and creamy and all hair and flowing and fleshy and Rubenesque and Venetian looking, or Venus looking, not Venetian, but like Venus. Is that Venetian? And so they tend to like accumulate. So they accumulate like flesh and weight. They tend to have a little bit more mucus. But they're like lovers. Like they're the ones you want to have as not only like your children's nanny, but you want them to be your nannies. They're just like hugging you. They're just like your massage therapist with their big hands, and they're just like loving on you.
And does that change through as you age? Do you move through the different doshas? Or
Yep. Okay. Yep. So I'll say when one is higher at one point in your life, and it just depends how you take care of yourself. And it's not bad either. You know what I mean? And it's like anyone can have any of these attributes, but these are the more of the tendencies. So the thing about kapha is, again, they tend to get stuck. So emotionally, they never let go. They're remembering the thing you did to them about 20 years ago. Like you forgot about, like, remember when you took that donut and I really wanted that donut? Well, I've never forgiven you for that. And they really don't. They're just like, it's still in there like it was yesterday. And, so they have that stuckness of like that. They're a little stuck in the past, a little maudlin. Digestion is slow, right? So when people say they look at food and they gain weight, well, very well could be because their metabolism is slow. So they would be the endomorphs in the Sheldon, whatever they call that, morphology. That's a name I'm just making up. I forgot what they're called. In psychology, we'll call them morphology. The vatas are the ectomorphs. The pittas are the mesomorphs, and then these guys are the endomorphs. And so they're not like movement oriented, right? They're just more like, you place me there and I am going to be there. So they're the ones that like are conservative. They stay way too long everywhere. And they're not the last at the party though, because the pittas tend to be, but but they
let's shift gears here because we're
running out of time.
No, we're not running out of time, but I want to talk about Vedanta.
What's that? I think we got a pizza right there.
So in my exploration of the philosophy since in the last couple of years, I've really come to believe that non-dual Vedantas is the best grasp of the nature of reality, at least as far as I can tell. And practically speaking, I can tell you something that has started to seep into my life is that I'm getting better at being able to, instead of being stuck in detail, zoom back up toward some kind of unity. Like, and best example is when things are happening that, may not be, to your liking at that particular moment, more and more often I'm able to say, well, I still exist. So everything is okay here. I'm able to pull up. And I think Vedanta is basically trying to teach us to go to find the unifying principle in whatever is happening. And it gives you an anchor that the detail doesn't, because the detail will carry you away. Where's the question here? Can you take us through your understanding of Vedanta in terms of just sort of both as a general philosophy, but more importantly, practical? What is it worth to us practically? How is it helpful to someone trying to live a modern life?
So Vedanta for people trying to live a modern life. Well, it's an interesting thing because what I see it from like all of the Vedas. So that's Vedanta comes from the Vedas. So what I see it and what it sounds like you're saying is like, it gives you a coping mechanism. Like, how do you process things? How do you perceive what you're experiencing?
Mm-hmm.
And what Vedanta, like all of the philosophies, try to help us with is to like, what are you really actually connecting your wagon to? Right? Something that's real or not real. Now, again, from the Ayurvedic Vedic, which all comes from something even more which is Samkhya philosophy, which is you have two things. You got that which is Purusha, which is pure consciousness. And then you have matter, which is Prakriti, again, that word again. And so what happens is that which is material, empirical, is that which is observable, which is matter. And then you have Purusha, which is like, you have to believe in it. Because again, you have to believe that there's this conscious element that creates liveness with the material world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, transcending that is a Brahman, which is the ultimate, right? Which is that pure conscious state. So that being said, that which is matter, that which is not staying the same ever, like we're never staying the same, we're tick, 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 we're moving on to the next, whatever we're going to be. So when you're connecting with something that doesn't stay stable, it's not a stable thing to stay connected to, right? So that's why it's moving.
So logical.
Right? That's it. It's so logical, but like for me, like, so that's what, like when I get that, I've been studying this for a while. I get that. I believe it. I don't talk about it that much because it's like, It's kind of annoying, really. It's because it's philosophy. And so you have to be somewhat of a philosophical person or a believer or somebody with faith to know what that is. Because there's no way, like I'm saying, like before, like you can't recruit people for this. This is like, you get it or you don't get it. You're attracted to it or you're not attracted to it.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. Like, you know, like even though we're always battling, they call it Maya, right? Like we're working with like the play of matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is real because it connects with our five senses, right? And even in Ayurveda, which I have to bring it back into that, Ayurveda says you have to purify your five sense organs because this is what you're perceiving in life with. So if they're kind of clogged and messed up, you're not going to have your brain work as functioning as well as it could. Mm-hmm. So that's a big part of like to get yourself into this like clarity model, which is sattvic. You have to do a lot of work. So one of the things, and so for the modern world, I don't know, it's a very interesting thing because even when I teach people and they get all excited about the philosophy, it's really hard to understand because it's philosophy. You know, that's one thing. And the reality is philosophy kind of messes up your modern experience.
Right.
Right? Because you're like, you know, and again, it's like, I see like the growth of yoga and people trying to get into this. And then I see the growth of like the stupidest, like distractions that you can ever even imagine people getting involved with, you know? And it's like, as much you're like, yeah, I'm like divine and I'm God, but then I'm like this image on a screen all the time. And I'm trying to promote my image, which is just an image, you know, mm-hmm. It's just an interesting thing.
It's really hard to transcend.
Yeah. It's hard to transcend it because you have all this power that's trying to keep you in this physical, you know, as the most important thing in your universe, you know, form. So I don't know. I don't think I answered your question. I probably just put more like, I don't know, like out there.
All right. I got another one.
Okay, thanks.
So as someone who spent like most of my career and life was spent in my head, more intellect based than at least career wise, it was all processed through my head. So I had I believed that opinion and point of view was important because, you know, it's a demonstration of the quality of your intellect. So these days, I have sort of flipped that on its head, and it occurs to me, I've understood everyone has a point of view simply by virtue of being born, right? Doesn't make you unique to have opinions. And what matters more to me now is not what I think, but what I know I am. Again, it brings me back to, it's like moving away from the differentiation of me towards trying to find unity in my own existence. And I keep, it's like it occurs to me that the movement in the one direction is so much simpler than adding opinions and adding stuff. You were saying earlier in Ayurveda that you want to remove stuff that's getting in your way, right? And to me, a lot of Vedanta is about getting rid of all the stuff that is making it difficult for you to, you know, find the best way for you to be, right? So instead of adding to my mind, I find now I am, you know, while I'm learning some of this stuff, the overall movement seems to be a removing from my mind. I'm becoming less opinionated. Is that true, Joey?
Yes. It's hard to ruffle your feathers these days. Like once upon a time, you know, it was kind of easy, but it's not now. It's like you're very steady. And that's probably the biggest shift I've seen.
But I think it's a lot of this reading. It's sort of taking me to the center as opposed to some notion of what I think makes me unique, right? I'm going towards what we all share, right?
Well, the thing about that would be like, again, opinions represent something that's like, we use the word ego in our culture, but in Sanskrit, it's ahamkara. So ahamkara is how you make sense of like how you have like a cohesion. So your cells have an ahamkara, your mind has an ahamkara. So I think ahamkara generates opinions. And so like for me, like opinions are also like, whatever, like like everybody has one, like, like other body parts, whatever you have. Right. So, and I find that that's all it is. And I find that people who believe their opinions so strongly, that's all that is. I'm like, you truly believe your opinion so much that you think it's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And when people talk about it, they're very passionate, very passionate about their opinions. And it seems to be we're in a time of opinions. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's not like we're not moving from opinions. It's almost like opinions matter more. And just like when people are reading, like I'm looking at Nextdoor and people are like even making recommendations. I'm like, well, who are you to listen to that person making that recommendation? Do you know that person? Do you know that they're sound mind? How do you know they're getting to that? How do they even get to that? That plumber is a good plumber. You had a good experience. You know what I mean? It's like, so like for me, because like I'm always a questioner of things, like I always like I'm a meta analyzer. And so it's like I always need to know the background thing. And even when someone gives me their opinion, I'm like, well, that's just all that is. It's just like your moment in time with this like little bit of a, viewpoint. That's it. You're just telling me out of that. You don't have the aerial view on the world, So they could be useful, but most of the time they're just reflections of that ahamkara, what that person thinks. And when that person that thinks very strongly about themselves, they have a strong opinion. That's it.
And ahamkara, is that, I know Eckhart Tolle, he lumps a lot of things under ego when he talks about ego, but it's probably more precise to say it falls under the ahamkara. So that's like the story. It's all of the things that make up that sense of individuality.
Yeah.
Not just your sense of individuality, but the whole shebang.
Yeah, the whole shebang and how it expresses. So again, you have to have one. If you don't have one, you're like, and everybody wants to be like, I'm one with the universe, but do you really want to be one with the universe? Someone's got to put you in a wheelbarrow and move you around. It's like, it's like you're no longer functioning. You're just like Ramakrishna. You're like, you're not functioning anymore. People have to take care of you. Right. Well, what's like the cool thing about being alive is that we're about fluctuation of imbalance, right? The only reason that it exists is that energy is not balanced. It's like, so it's kind of interesting. So like to get balanced means you're no longer in the game, And so like, even like, and I've been around some people who have limited opinions, they express knowledge and stuff like that, but they know like their opinions, like just what's an opinion, like it's just.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. Like I am still me, but my inclination is the other direction than it used to be. And a lot of it comes from what I've come to understand about yoga. And I'm like, oh, this is one of the secrets of it. You want to lean back, not forward or whatever, in, not out. And it's helpful to me just because I find I don't get, like Joey said, I don't get, if your opinion is in conflict with mine, historically, I would find that very irritating. More often these days, I don't care. I don't care if we agree, right? If that's what it looks like from over there. That's versus what it looks like from over here. It's fine with me. I'm less inclined to sit in judgment of people whose point of views are different than mine.
Well, I think the interesting thing is what made that change, besides just studying Vedanta, because, people study Vedanta and they're like still opinionated, strangely enough, just like they do hatha yoga and they're still irritated, I mean, it's like, so what do you think was like?
I think it was all the above. It was Joey. It was hatha yoga. It was starting to meditate. It was the quiet of quarantine. It was wondering about, like I was working on a book before I wrote Tickle called The Precision Paradox, where I was trying to get at the point that we count too many things. We think we're understanding things by quantifying everything. But to your point about Prakriti and Purusha, it's like numbers, you can only count the visible. You cannot count the invisible. So as the more we lean into that, the more we're getting suckered by surface appearance of stuff. And not, COVID was a great example. It's like we counted the shit out of that thing, right? There has never been a greater orgy of counting in the history of mankind, but we didn't understand it. We still don't understand what happened. So I think all those things happened to me at once, but I think for me, it was the quiet of quarantine and the lack of distraction my mind exploded, or
Well,
like
it's
in a
like you
good way.
said. Like, I think it's all the things. Like, I think yoga is definitely, I get really excited when somebody starts doing hatha yoga because I feel like it's sort of like you're coming in the back door to spirituality. And eventually it sort of seems to pull, not everyone, but, it pulls a lot of people into the spiritual side of it because the asana is just that one little part.
Better food with Joey. Living up here full time.
That's why. Yeah, that's perfect. That's why I like doing
Yeah.
teacher training, because again, it's like people think it's just this physical practice. And then all of a sudden I'm like, here you go with the books. Here you go with the philosophy. And it's exciting watching people kind of like get into it because they're seeing that, wow, it's so much like, so not only is it so much more, it's so much more like useful for transformation when you get beyond the poses. Poses make you feel good. There's no doubt you're working chemistry in your body. You're getting the tension out, you're breathing and you're regulating. But then when you get into the inquiry of like who you are, and what has been motivating you for your whole life, which could be numbers, it could be opinions, it could be like, whatever it is, your profession. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, that's just, why would I be, it's transient. You can't hold on to it. You can't even hold on to your hair. It changes. It just leaves, it's just all on its way out.
I feel like it's like a bit like a ladder because when I started doing regular yoga, I think it was like 2008, I was suddenly able, I started meditating when I was a kid, but never enjoyed it because I was never comfortable sitting for that long. And so doing yoga, all of a sudden I could sit for a half hour without body pain. And so that led to one thing. And then meditating consistently led to another shift in my consciousness. And it was just like one thing after another. And they all seem to build on each other.
Yeah. And there's so many ways to get in there. It could be through inquiry, what Duff is doing, the jnana yoga. You could just sort of study and you can sort of what resonates with your intellect, which is fine. There's no against that. Because like the intellect can also transform into the heart because it's always that connection between the two. Because wisdom is always going to hit you in the intuition. It just does. It goes into that deep place where you're not even sure why that resonates. You're just like right in there. So, there's multiple paths. You can do it even if, by just giving to other people selflessly. That's why there's so many ways to get in there. So I don't know. That's a good thing. Yoga is like
all of the above. Let's do all of it.
Yeah, all of the above is what they say you should do in the Kali Yuga because it's just dark times. It's going to be so much more conflictual. You're going to get drawn in two different directions at the same time, which doesn't bring you anywhere. Just sort of like you're stuck in that one space. And so it's, so, I mean, it's interesting being I wouldn't be anything but a modern yoga teacher because I'm in modern times and I teach in like that sort of current fashion of what people are doing. Right. And the cool thing about all of these sciences is that they're alive. So it doesn't care. It's not going, wow, you're making this more modern and you're dealing with these bodies that sit in a desk all day long. So you're not just doing traditional, whatever that means, yoga, right? You have to deal with what's in front of you. And that's what Ayurveda says. And that's what Vedanta says, deal with what's reality. Like
with
Dr.
what is,
Svoboda.
right?
Well, what is, like you have to deal with reality as Robert Svoboda says, or reality is going to come deal with you. This is the way it is. That's what the nature of reality is. And so it's like, how do you make yourself calm? Which is a big part of what he teaches is like, not through meditation, but through like just talking about things. He brings a lot of topics and so many different dimensions. And so it's, he's a brilliant teacher. Totally check him out. Like, he's pretty remarkable for that next level because in yoga, you don't really even splice out what yoga you're doing. He's a tantric and he's a Ayurvedic doctor and he's an agori and then Shubraji, but it's all like, it's like all just in there, even though Shubraji doesn't do hatha yoga, right? But she just does the yoga. She just does yoga.
Mm-hmm.
So with a, specific focus.
She's a very clear thinker and speaker. That was, that's what I took away from that. It was like crystal clear. Love that. She's
a great translator into that which is kind of like dense and philosophical into what humans experience. Because that's all the reason this will be valuable is if we can actually use it as humans. Because otherwise it's just information. Right? But you're seeing it, you're living it, you're going, oh yeah, this is helping me become a little bit more balanced, more sane, more tolerant. And those are gifts. Those are absolute gifts. Because who benefits? You and everybody around you.
Right. And also, everything's easier.
Yeah.
And
All
Linda,
right.
you mentioned a teacher training. When is your next teacher training?
September 30th is when we're starting. We're already like getting people enrolled in it. Cause again, it's more like, it's like yoga school where you're learning all that stuff. But I actually have a lot of teachers that, people want to do to actually become teachers. Some of them we're like, well, I'm just here for the education. I think people feel really embarrassed that they want to become yoga teachers, which is like, it's almost like they're saying, I'm so great at yoga. I remember when someone asked me when I knew I was good at yoga. And I will say one thing, I never even thought if I was good at yoga, which I think I probably should have stopped and go, am I good at this? I didn't know I was good at this.
You're great at this.
I didn't know. I mean, I didn't think that it was like good at this. I was like, how do you get good at this? But so anyway, so it's fun to see people who, who learn the skills to share this. But for me, it's just how do you share it? Like, it's not like I'm on this pulpit and I'm like, hi, I'm the yoga teacher and I'm God. If anything, I'm more like not God. I'm in the trenches with you. I'm like, how do we get through this moment? Kind of like coach. I don't want to use the word coach because that's, its own thing. But it's not that for me, it's not like that. It's grand, but it's not that grand. It's like, how do you show someone how to do this physically? And then when you teach the energetic part, that's the cool thing. Right. Then you're like, oh, wow, this is so much bigger than that.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's why I love doing it. Again, I'm going into my, 20th year teaching teachers.
Wow. And
so it's, yeah. So I get to also share all this stuff that only you asked me to share with you. Otherwise.
Listeners, Shakti Yoga's in Woodstock. If you ever come through town, you want to stop in there. Linda and all the other teachers there as well, including Selena, who we've had on here last year too. It's always a thrill. We haven't been to Shakti in a while. We've been going for morning walks, so we got to get over there. Joey, this is your fault somehow.
If you wear your
I did yoga 2 days ago.
It counts as a class when you wear your t-shirt.
We're doing the other kinds of yoga. We just haven't done the hatha yoga in a little while.
Whatever. Yeah. You go in and out of it. You know what I mean? It's like, whatever.
We'll be back. We'll be back. I forgot how much I like your face. So we got to come back.
We love you.
Love you.
Thank
guys.
you, Linda.
Keep
Thanks
progress.
So much.
Bye.
I'm going to just come out and say it. Favorite yoga teacher ever.
She's great. She's fantastic.
Selena and her are like a yin and yang of two different personality types. Shakti is my favorite yoga studio ever.
Yeah.
By far.
Yep. That's wonderful.
And the point that she was making about energetics at the end there is a class with her is not just someone telling you which poses to assume, right? It is a dynamic interplay where you can tell she's feeding off the energy in the room. She tells stories. She's funny. Her flows are dynamic. They're not rote, right? Like you never know what it's going to be. It's great.
Right. Yep. She's the best.
All right. So, I've got one for you. This is interesting because you brought up a few minutes ago there the idea of individuality, right? And I was reading, like I said in there, Swami Vivekananda last week, and he made a point which kind of came as a shock to me that individual comes from indivisible, right? It's the same thing. So the individual part of you is not the part that we think it is. And he says the following. Individuality means what cannot be divided. How can you call this individuality? 1 hour you're thinking one way, and the next hour another way, and 2 hours after another way. Individuality is that which changes not, that which is beyond all things, changeless. It would be tremendously dangerous for this state to remain in eternity, because then the thief would always remain a thief and the blackguard a blackguard. If a baby died, he would have to remain a baby. The real individuality is that which never changes and will never change, and that is the God within us. So, right? What?
So what is individuality really?
Right. What makes you who you really are? It's not the stuff that you think makes you different. It's the part of you that never changes. We have lost track of what that word means.
Well, we're so engrossed. It was like Linda was saying in the manifestation, like we're a sensual being and we're taking in all this information through our senses, and it's very distracting, so that we've come to the point where that's what we think we are. And I think
that was my point about opinions and stuff, right? Is I used to think that the who you are hinged on what your thoughts were, what you had to tell to people, all the sort of what makes the words coming out of Duff's mouth unique from someone else's. And I thought it was the different stories and the different stuff. Right. I think it's the opposite now.
Yeah. I had Betty explaining that to me when I was pretty young, but it still took a while to sink in.
And just because it's a Vedanta day, because Linda is, that's her thing.
Because you can't stop.
Because I can't stop. We have a double Vivekananda for you. And here is a quote. This is from this passage in a book called The Philosophy of Vedanta. And I'm not sure I necessarily agree with her. I don't think it's as dry as people think it could be. I think it's as good as it gets. This is the best reading ever. So he's talking about the fact, like, one of the main sort of pillars of Vedanta is that it's all Brahman, which she mentioned. It's all one thing. Everything is one thing. There's only one thing. All differences are illusory, or all appearances are illusory. And that ultimately, in which case the answer cannot help but be within, because everything that seems to be without to you is not the real part of you, right? And it's not the real part of your experience or your existence. And so he's got this great passage here. He says, "Thus man, after this vain search for various gods outside himself, completes the circle and comes back to the point from which he started, the human soul. And he finds that the God whom he was searching for in hill and dale, whom he was seeking in every brook, in every temple, in churches and heavens, that God whom he was even imagining as sitting in heaven and ruling the world, is his own self. I am he, and he is I. None but I was God, and this little I never existed." So the part that we think is the individual, the common colloquial individual, doesn't even exist. So the thing that we all hang on all the time, what makes me me, what makes me different, these are all illusory and passing and transient differences, right? None but I was God, and this little I never existed. Right? It's all one thing, Joey.
It is. It's true.
On which note, this one program you're listening to is now over. Thanks
Bye-bye.
for listening. We'll be back with you in a week.
You've been listening to How to Tickle Yourself with your host, Duff McDonald, and me, Joey of Rockledge. You can help us by liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast with others. You can talk to us and see what else is happening on Instagram and Facebook at How to Tickle Yourself. This program was recorded in Studio B of the historic Rockledge Recording Studio. Right here, right now, our original 16-part theme music was written and recorded by the legendary Paul Reddick and Kyle Ferguson of the Sidemen, with Steve Mariner on bass and drums and in the mixing room. This podcast is produced and distributed by Storic Media. Our editor is Oscar Desiderio. Our producers are Kristen Verbitsky and Chuck Labella. For more information, visit storicmedia.com. That's STORIC media.com.